My name is Randy Collins. I'm a landscape architect with Beta Group and have been hired to work on the linear park project for the Friends of Canonchet Farm. So the project limits generally are running along here. We've taken a look at also up into this zone as well as up in here and all the way to about there. And I'm going to talk about a couple of ideas for the intersection as well. So the goals of the project is to create better connectivity from the museum to the beach to the downtown to the pier. So the concept behind this is to try to create a trail system that makes that connectivity, and I'll try to point out the different connectivity elements to you on that. This particular option shows the trail system as it goes around the pond. Obviously this is the pond, here's the South Pavilion parking lot. And one of the things that this does is sort of a bigger vision that looks at how pedestrian mobility and safety can be enhanced. And what it does is basically take the intersection here and neck down that intersection. So for purposes of understanding, this is currently the curb line here. And there's the curb line there. What we're trying to do is to bring that intersection down to a more pedestrian scale without having a negative impact both on traffic flow and on emergency response vehicles. And I think that from our experience, these kinds of techniques, this neck down, this little bump out here, and bringing the curb line into the center of the road can go a long way in accomplishing that. What it does do is to help create a shorter crossing distance here, a little bit of a shorter crossing distance here and here as well. Other elements of the concept is, as you can see, really giving a good definition to the sidewalk along this side of Narragansett Avenue, bringing the trail into the park itself, creating connections to the crosswalks to the beach, creating connections around the pond, and I'll show you the rest of it off the screen to the right in just a second. But the other part of the concept is creating some meaningful spaces and trying to be able to come up with ways that the concepts behind the trails as well as the connectivity for pedestrians can be something that we can be able to sell to the Rhode Island DOT. So you're looking at these green things, and I'm sorry the differentiation in the color isn't really that strong, but these are sort of a more chartreusey green, more of a forest green color. The difference in those are that the forest green might be just subtle burning up of the soil to create potential for plantings or just to give some definitions to the way the trails circulate through these. And the chartreusey green are potential rain gardens that would take drainage off of the roadway. The red dots that you see are inlets that exist out there today. Currently, a lot of these outlets just go directly into the pond. And there is no real significant treatment that they're providing to the stormwater before it gets into the pond itself. The Department of Transportation is under a consent decree from the EPA on treating and making water quality improvements to their stormwater system. I've checked with the DOT. They haven't got anything in this area of Narragansett Avenue and Beach Street, Ocean Road that is under design. But one idea is to go to them and in a very proactive way say, look, we understand that this is something that you're going to be looking at closely. We have some ideas that we could partner with you to be able to give you an opportunity to treat your, stormwater before it discharges into the pond, and also make some significant pedestrian connection improvements to the intersection, and be able to present that as a way of creating a partnership where there can be a win-win scenario. The win-win would be certainly some portions of the project as envisioned being constructed by the DOT at their cost. Other elements of this concept is a covered water, like a dock type of structure. This is the current osprey nest location right there. That is part of the connectivity, part of the interconnected aspects of the walkway. A larger pavilion, shade pavilion here, with the opportunity for these areas to be landscaped or maybe create a high point that gets people up a little higher than they currently can get up to under the current grades in the park, to be able to get some views over to the ocean and to create a sense of interest with plantings and the grading that allow this to become a spot that's inviting for people to want to be over there. Going further down, here's the South Pavilion. The continuation of that trail, so we were just looking at this end of, whoops, pushing wrong buttons. There's the end there, which is picking up right here. Some more rain gardens, gets a little narrower as the pond gets closer. But the concept would be to try to pick up even a drainage inlet here and bring it into a system so that we would be catching any of the stormwater that falls on the roadway and having the opportunity to treat it before it gets into the pond. But continuing the trail concept is having the, working with the connections here across the street, but then looking at, as you come into Ann Hoxie, a couple of areas where there are structures. We currently have one here, would be rebuilt, have another connection here, and then look at this becoming a shared use roadway that would be for obviously people going in and out of Ann Hoxie, parking at the beach, but as well as being that trailhead area for someday in the future, the bike path coming down and intersecting, being able to provide defined sidewalks along that edge, and just off this top of the graphic is an island area for the station for when people are coming in for the beach parking, but also to try to slow people down in those times of the year when it's not being actively used for beach parking. And then connect the sidewalks in to the larger trail system that's part of Canonchet Farm. Another idea is looking at, not just having the roadway, the sidewalk along the roadway, along the rest of the limits, and this goes all the way down to about the Dunes Club or so, but being able to look for opportunities to get people out and into the areas closer to the pond. So what this one envisions is a boardwalk structure. This is a pretty low area to a higher point here that gets you out and around to another boardwalk structure, and then a sidewalk that connects in to give a little sense of interest and a little bit of a different experience than one would get along the walking along the roadway. So I showed you this option before, thinking about how it may be received by the DOT and the fact that sometimes projects with the DOT take a little while longer to get going and developed into design and constructed, is maybe an interim option, or maybe this would ultimately be the option if DOT decided not to partner. And that would be looking at trying to create the same feeling, but not having that large neck down area. So really we're trying to create the same kind of feeling, but we're working within the context of the intersection geometry as it currently exists. So I wanted to make sure that we had that option in case we weren't met with great fanfare as we met with the Department of Transportation to tell them that we were going to solve some of their water quality issues along Ocean Road and Beach Street. The one thing that we did, we had a meeting with Mike DeLuca, the town planner, and the one thing that we also talked about, and I'll give you some of his comments and feedback as I'm going through this, is if this were to be a concept that the DOT embraced, maybe we would actually do that further down over here. The geometry of that intersection is really very wide, very similar to the intersection here as well. And so if you're really thinking about the connectivity for pedestrians between the pier, going down to the tower, the park, and some other areas as you want to walk down along the wall, that intersection is pretty unfriendly for a pedestrian, much like this intersection is as well. And so talk about maybe having that concept pulled all the way down to that intersection to try to create a much more friendly environment for pedestrians to feel safe going around the downtown area. So that would be what it would look like. Another thing that came out of a discussion point that came out of the meeting with Mike DeLuca was, wouldn't this be a fantastic place for some sort of sculptural element? Not necessarily from the same sort of sculptures that are being around the pier area, but being able to come up with those kind of interest points to be able to utilize some of these spaces to help give them some definition and a sense of interest, and the overall kind of sense of connection to the greater pier area. So this is what the area would look like if we were to draw it up as we did and not show any of the proposed improvements, as a way of being able to communicate the design. And this is what it could look like under the more aggressive option. If you look at where the parking spots start, and you can correct me if I'm going astray, but they start right around in here. This neck down could come and maybe come down and not go so far in that direction, but maybe here, and help to give definition to the parking, on-street parking, and maybe even eke out a few, because if you look at the curb line right here, this is where the curb line would be, which is currently out in the middle of the intersection. It gives us the opportunity, I think, to grab a little more real estate to add a parking space or two. And I'd rather show a more aggressive pedestrian-oriented plan before we start peeling back to add parking spaces. But to answer your question, I think it could be designed and not impact any parking and potentially maybe gain a parking space or two. So you can see one of the dock area here with a covering over it, what it could look like. And you can see the larger pavilion in the background. One of the things that, in looking at some of the photographs that have been provided to us, is maybe this starts to take on more of a character, architecturally speaking, that takes cues from the farm structures, whether or not it's the mansion itself, but really trying to tie visually the architecture of these two structures to that, so that in a way that it really can start to bring the feel of the farm out to Ocean Road and Beach Street and Narragansett Avenue, and give that sort of sense of connection that the trail project is trying to create to the larger pier area. I mean, if you were to go out there right now and put cones out there to define that curb as we're showing it, the traffic is, I'll put it this way, the geometry of the new curb line is such that it would be able to facilitate traffic flow as it exists today. It just is an overly wide intersection, a large radius to create that, it creates that. So it would not bottleneck it. I mean, it's also a signalized intersection, so you have control. So people in that area, generally speaking, in the summer months, when there's a lot more traffic going through there, are more stop and go. In the off-season times, you get a little more free flow of traffic through there, and it should be able to work just fine in that manner as well. What it boils down to is when you accommodate a fire truck, a school bus, those types of vehicles, a car can easily navigate it if a fire truck can navigate the geometry of that curb. So moving on down, this is Ann Hoxie, continuing the feel of the path. We get sort of tight along this section of the roadway where there's not a lot of opportunity to weave in and out. It could, but one of the things that we're looking at is where we can provide some areas where we are trying to treat some of the stormwater similar to up at the intersection with Narragansett Avenue. And where we can swing out, be able to swing out, this is where Hurricane Sandy created a neat little sandy beach along the pond. And then going further down, looking at the same sort of concepts, where we can swing out and get the sidewalk away from the roadway, do that, and then also try to provide these areas of rain garden treatments. How aggressive those are can be discussed as we are, if we're successful with DOT, to be able to work with those to maybe make them a little more extensive, if at all possible, and create that sort of continuous feel of improved green space, water quality treatment, and pedestrian amenity that looks at how that all can work together along the corridor. And with that said, there's also opportunities to look at, if they were interested in a greater project, is really looking at the entire cross section of the roadway from about here all the way down to where Ocean Avenue comes off a beach, and look at maybe changing the overall geometry curb line to be able to create spaces not only for pedestrians and stormwater improvements, but maybe even making these areas a little safer for bicyclists that are using the corridor as well. So that's one thing that we want to keep our eye on as well as we move through the process. Because one of the things that we're also talking about is the connectivity of this project. The graphic sort of ended right about here, but really the intent would be to bring that sidewalk, a real formal sidewalk, up along this side and make a connection. So this side of the roadway would be connected as well. And then looking at the possibilities, you can see these dark lines. Can you see that?
Yep.
One of the things that we're going to explore as well is whether or not we can make a connection of the trail through this area. There's the pump station. This is a town right away. There's a small area of private property right there that we'd have to look at. But one of these days, probably when the leaves get off the trees, Alan and I are going to take a hike out there and see what the potential is for making a connection around there. One of the things that I think is a good idea about that is people love to walk in loops. So if you can have a loop, and even bigger loop, it gives us, I think, a really good opportunity to make this become a really significant feature for the community, as well as what you're looking for as far as making a linear park along this side of Beach Street. And one of the things that we talked about, and it falls outside the limits of what this aerial shows, is the connection to the bike path up here and how it would work around here and then come back down through. I may not trace that exactly, but they're certainly going to be challenged with having to create a boardwalk structure way up here where the rail line corridor, the railroad corridor is, and getting it to cross some wetlands to be able to come to the northwestern side of the farm, to be able to connect into the system and come down through here. But that's their intent. And so, same thing with the little boardwalk structure that I showed over here. At some point, as we move forward through the process, we're going to want to have a meeting with the folks at CRMC, talk about the concepts. Usually, when you're talking about doing things like a boardwalk structure here that I showed in one of the renderings, that'll be a bit of a challenge with CRMC. But I think the way we're looking at it in dealing with all the things that we're trying to accomplish, taking into account the permitting, taking into account the costs of construction, is how can we partner with CRMC, the folks at DOT, to be able to come up with a concept that accomplishes a lot of the goals that you're trying to accomplish, and maybe accomplishes some of the goals that those other agencies are looking to try to accomplish, so that you can partner together and be able to work and be able to come up with both the permitting ability and the funds available to be able to construct the project.
Would we get some points for looking into how we could create better drainage from the road into the ponds?
Well, I think DOT would definitely be paying close attention to that. And if you looked at this just on the surface of it, without the concept of putting a trail system in and the flexibility to utilize this property, the DOT would be very challenged. There's not a lot of grade to be able to drain the roadway. It's relatively flat from one end of the project limit to the next. It's relatively flat to be able to think about water falling into a catch basin, going down into that basin, going out a pipe, and discharging into the pond. They currently now dig out areas along the ponds to clear the pipes because sedimentation takes place, and where they discharge gets filled in. And so I think being able to come up with an idea where we can say, well, let's move a drainage system through a swale where we're deepening this, raising this grade up, that might be something that I think that they would find very attractive as a way to solve some of those challenging issues of being able to improve water quality through this corridor. With the proximity to the pond, it really gives them a sense of urgency as well. Certainly the plantings would take a cue on that. Do you put arrowwood viburnum that you see here right over there? I don't know if you do that. I think you'd start to look at how you can create pockets of plants, as I was saying earlier, that can help reinforce the feeling of this being, as you're walking through this curvilinear paths, making it feel like it's purposeful. It's not like it's responding to a natural environment to the greatest degree, as opposed to making it feel like you're going through a forced ornamental garden type of characteristic. Thank you.
Thank you.
What I'm going to be doing